Good morning. It's good to see everyone this morning. We're in the book now of 2 Kings. We last week stopped in chapter 2, and we came to one of those interesting spots where you may recall that Elisha curses some young lads, and some translations literally have children or boys. That's probably not the most accurate way to put it. The word stands for a young man aged 12 to 30. When you look it up, and I gave you some references here, David is called a young man when he's out taking care of the sheep in 1 Samuel 16, and in 2 Samuel 14, and also in chapter 18, Absalom is called by this same name. Well, he's not a young man. He, in the sense that we would think, not a boy, because he's already led Israel in rebellion and into battle. He's full grown, but he's young in the sense that he's 30, between 12 and 30. What age? Don't know. Just telling you that's the case. Notice that Elisha curses these fellas because of what? Because of what they say to him. Go up, you bald head. Go up, you bald head. It was derogatory. It was belittling. But most importantly, because he is God's spokesman, it is belittling of God. And so Elisha calls for a curse, but now please notice, Elisha does not designate how the curse is going to be carried out. Instead, it's God that sends the two she-bears, and they maul these young men who've been disrespectful of both God's prophet and God. All right, you remember in chapter 1 that we noticed that Moab rebelled. It was mentioned just in a passing type of a note, and then he went on. But in chapter 3 we come back and we learn more about that rebellion. Jehoram is the new king. He was the son of Ahab. We mentioned him last week. He became king over Israel at Samaria. That's the capital city. He did eliminate, of all things, Baal worship, which makes you wonder. His mama was a big Baal worshiper, and Ahab was supportive of that. He put that away, but he didn't give up. Idolatry, specifically, he continues with the false worship of a fellow by the name of Jeroboam. And that tends to be the underlying problem over and over again in the land of Israel. Well, King Mesha of Moab rebelled against Israel. How does that play out, you might ask? Well, he quits paying taxes. That's what it boils down to. This is what you might call a tax rebellion on the part of Mesha. Jehoram decides he can't afford that. He's got to go and end the rebellion because he needs the tax money. And so he forms an alliance between himself and Jehoshaphat of Judah, and also Edom joined in this. Well, they began to think, how are we going to go? How are we going to travel from here to there? And Jehoshaphat's answer is, let's go south by the way of the Negev. Now, what we're looking at here is they could have just crossed the Jordan. And if they'd have crossed the Jordan, they'd have been ready to fight Moab. But the problem is that Mesha has reinforced, and this is mostly known historically, he has reinforced the fortifications just across the river. And so Jehoshaphat is thinking, let's do an end run around him. That's what we call it. And so he goes south, they go south, the three kings and their armies, and as they swing down through the Negev, 7 days in the desert leaves them all starved to death for water. Not just the armies, but also their animals. And they're in danger of dying because of a lack of water. It is interesting that in verse 10 that the king of Israel said, "Alas, for the Lord has called these three kings together to deliver them into the hand of Moab." Here's my question. Where in the text does it say God called them to do anything? And the answer is, it doesn't. Sometimes that includes me, I'm telling you that up front, sometimes we conclude that the only way God can handle this situation is the way I figured out. And sometimes He doesn't agree. How do you know? Well, it doesn't work out that way, just putting it quite frankly. And I think these fellows are giving credit to God for something He didn't do, didn't ever say. There's no evidence of that. Jehoshaphat, in typical fashion, this will be the second time that he has done this. He says, let's inquire of the Lord. Now, most interesting, for the only time that I can think of just right off the bat, the three kings do not send messengers to Elisha, but instead they go personally. That's how humbled they are by what's going on. And Elisha gives them some instructions. And the instructions are, dig a bunch of trenches in the valley. And God's going to fill them up without any wind and no rain. Now, I will have to say that at this particular point, Jehoram, maybe because of Jehoshaphat, I don't know, he actually acts in a faithful way because they dig the trenches. Now, Israel, as far as the soil at this particular place, looks a whole lot like, Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. Red clay. I'm not talking about the black belt, where the deep black earth is, up in the delta. I'm talking about that. I'm talking about the red stuff that we run into when we dig. And boy, in Georgia, they really run into it. And in Alabama, they've got a lot of it too. So what they've done now is they dug these trenches. Now the water comes. Where does water come from? Well, it didn't come from wind, didn't come from rain. Here's my best guess. And notice what I said, best guess. There was a storm up above, and the water came down the valley like you'd expect it to. And it filled up the trenches. Well, Moab comes up, as you'll see in the text. And by the way, let me pause long enough to say, your assignment every week is to read the text. We're going too fast for me to read every bit of this text. If you're not reading, you're not understanding the whole story. I guarantee you. Because I'm not telling the whole story. I'm doing the best I can. Okay, so Moab comes up, and they come up at basically daybreak. Here's the sun beaming down on these trenches full of water that are in a red clay basin, you might say. What's the water going to look like? It's going to look red. And what's their conclusion? It's blood. And they decide, you know what's happened? Israel and Judah and Edom fought it out, and they've slaughtered one another. And that's their blood. And so the army, in excitement, says, just imagine how much there is down there for us to seize. We're talking, gold and silver and clothing and so forth. So they rush down there with no organization. Think about typical battle. A general's going to try to organize his forces. They're not organized at all. They just run down there pell-mell, and when they get down there, what happens? They start getting a whooping because the three kings have not destroyed one another. Their forces are ready, and they begin to attack. And the attack goes very much against Moab. Now, they drive Moab back until finally they end up going into a city, and the three kings press the battle against the Moabites, and as they press the battle, something happens, and I want to read that to you, verse 27, because Elisha has said, God's going to give you the victory. Okay, they fulfilled God's will, dug the trenches. God did give them the victory. It's evident that God basically did the fighting, not them. They just took advantage of the setup that God gave them. But here's what happens. This is the king of Moab. He took his eldest son, who would have reigned in his place, and offered him as a burnt offering upon the wall. And there was great indignation against Israel. So they departed from him and returned to their own land. Okay. So how do we explain it? There are two explanations I found that made any sense at all. Explanation number one comes from Kyle in his commentary on this. Kyle and Delitzsch were two German scholars, very conservative, I might add, and they did believe in the New Testament. They'll often quote the New Testament, or at least refer to it. They were translated from German into English, and those volumes are in our library, very useful. I happen to have them in my library too. But at any rate, Kyle makes this, he calls this wrath, and by the way, the word sometimes is translated indignation. He says it is only used to refer to God's wrath on sinful man. And so Kyle concludes that Israel's violent push, which resulted in human sacrifice, had angered God. That's Kyle's conclusion. Now, Whitworth thinks the sacrifice of the heir to the throne, that drove Moab into a frenzy, and that they got angry and fought all the more. Now, I lean toward Kyle. Why? Because of the word. Because that word is only used of God's wrath toward the sinful men. So my leaning is that Kyle knows what he's talking about, and that's the way I go. You want to choose the other way? Fine. You got another explanation? As long as it doesn't violate Scripture, that's fine too. You know, you get to choose what you think. That's what I think, and I've given it to you. So, chapter 4. This is another case with Elisha and a widow that you may recall or heard about. Now, think about a time of famine. A certain woman of the wives of the sons of the prophets cried out to Elisha, saying, "Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that your servant feared the Lord, and the creditor's coming to take my two sons to be his slaves." In Israel, the law, this law of Moses, allowed for enslavement for debts. Now, was there a limit? And the answer is yes. Every 7 years, they would be released from that. It's a Sabbath year is what it boils down to. You have 7 of those, and then the week after the year after that is Jubilee. And so there comes one time where there's supposed to be a double. By the way, they never did it. Israel never kept that. And that's part of what gets them in trouble. It's also how God sets the length of time that Israel is going to spend in Babylonian captivity. How many Sabbath years and Jubilees had they missed? 70. How many years do they spend in Babylonian captivity? 70. So if you ever wonder about that, now you got the pieces. You know, they go together. Very, very easy explanation, and yet, not one we just come upon just instantly. You have to do a little study. Okay, so the widow's got a problem. The creditor's going to come, take her sons, going to make them slaves. She's a widow. How's she going to live? I mean, you think about that. And Elisha's answer is, go borrow jars. Just get as many jars as you can get. And he takes advantage of what's in her house. By the way, God always does that. You ever notice that? When Moses wants to know, what am I going to tell him? How am I going to say who sent me? God says, what's that in your hand? Here we got this widow. What do you got? I got some oil, a little bit of oil. Go get all the pots you can get. And you and your son go behind closed doors and fill the pots. And they would fill one, set it aside. Fill another one, set it aside. Fill another one, set it aside. And when they got finished, when they ran totally out of pots, they had enough oil to fill all of them. Now what? Sell them. Sell the oil. Not sell the pots, but sell the oil, because they're borrowed pots. You take them back home. So they sell the oil, and what does that do? She pays the debts, and then they have enough money to live on. Andy commented before class how many miracles Elisha works, and it is remarkable. He works more miracles as far as the record is concerned. He works more miracles than Elijah did. There are a lot in this story. So that takes care of the widow. Well, then we come to the story of the Shunammite, a Shunammite woman. And what you learn about this woman is that she basically has plenty. She's wealthy. And you're going to learn that as the story goes along. So this woman, this Shunammite woman, sees Elisha going back and forth. He keeps crossing through the area. And she says to her husband, hey, let's build him a room so he'll have a place to stop. And apparently the husband agreed. By the way, this is not just a lean-to. There's some words in the Hebrew which guys like Kyle can read. I don't. And they say that the word here is for wall, separate walls, strong walls. So it's an actual room. It's his room. Some people call it the prophet's chamber. If you ever wonder, if you're driving down the road and you happen to see that, it's just down Sywell, that you got a sign on a house that says prophet's chamber. What's a prophet's chamber? Well, it's a place for traveling evangelists or prophets to stay. By the way, I don't believe in modern-day miraculous prophets, but I can speak the word. So, in that sense only, I'm a prophet. Oh, don't go beyond that. I didn't go beyond that. Okay, so they build a room. Elisha starts coming. He feels very blessed by all of this, and he asks her. He says, what can I do for you? And she says. He said, can I speak to the rulers in the area or something like that? Oh, no. I live among my own people. Implication, got all the money I need, and I know everybody. I don't need you to introduce me to anybody. I don't need you to go argue my case. I'll argue my own case, is basically what she said. It's not, by the way, flippant. Maybe it sounds flippant for me. It's respectful, but it's true. She doesn't need help. In this regard. So Gehazi, Elisha's servant, speaks up, and he says, she doesn't have a child. And so Elisha says to the Shunammite woman, about this time next year, you're going to have a baby. You're going to have a boy. And she said, don't lie to me. She's apparently up in years a little bit. And she just can't believe she's going to have a child. But she does. She has a child. Sometime later, how long? Don't know. That boy is out in the field working with Dad. You'd assume he's got a little bit of age on him because he's out in the field working with his dad. And he begins to say that his head, my head, it's just hurting so badly. And eventually, the child is returned to Mama, and Mama, while with Mama, he dies. Mama carries the boy up to the prophet's chamber, to Elisha's room, and she gets saddled onto a donkey and heads out. and along the way, Elisha looks out, and he sees her coming. He may have been on Mount Carmel. I have to double check my text again on that. See, is that right? That's what I thought. Because Carmel's, he's got a high vantage point. He sees her coming. He says, "That looks like the Shunammite woman." And he sends Gehazi, says, "Go find out if there's something wrong." Well, he comes to the woman, and he asks her, and she says, "Everything's fine." Well, you might wonder at that. You might say, well, is she lying? Well, no. She is determined to take her own case to the prophet. So as far as can Gehazi help her? No. Everything's fine in reference to Gehazi. She wants to talk to Elisha. That's who she wants to talk to. Well, she gets there, and basically she says, "Did I ask you for a boy?" I told you not to lie to me. Elisha, finding out what's wrong, sends Gehazi. I hope I got there are two of these stories, so I hope I got the right one. Sends Gehazi with his staff, with Elisha's staff. And he says, "Go put that on the boy." So that seems a bit odd, but okay. That's what he does. And meanwhile, here comes Elisha with the Shunammite woman. Elisha arrives, and he lays down face-to-face on the boy. Am I telling the right story? I've read so many stories. I'm ahead of the class now by several chapters. So if I ever sound like I'm disjointed, probably am. A little bit. So he lays down on him, and ends up the young man sneezes 7 times, and he comes to life, and Elisha gives him to his mother. So here is a resurrection of the dead, if I recall correctly, the first resurrection of the dead in the Old Testament that you find, and of all people, it's Elisha that does it. And therefore, as you can imagine, some of the commentators like to find lots of parallels between Elisha and Jesus. There are some. There's no doubt about that. But they're two totally different people, obviously. Okay, so the Shunammite's son and the resurrection of the Shunammite's son. Now remember, we're in the middle of a famine, and so we want to go to verse 38 of chapter 4, in the middle of this famine. Elisha returned to Gilgal, and there was a famine in the land. Now the sons of the prophets were sitting before him, and he said to his servant, "Put on the large pot and boil stew for the sons of the prophets." Anybody ever have a hobo stew? If you really do this correctly, you're supposed to cut the labels off your cans and just bring them. That's what you're supposed to do. And everybody dumps their stuff in one pot, and you cook it, and everybody eats it. Well, these fellas are making hobo stew. I mean, that's basically what it boils down to. Except they don't have cans. They're looking for various things to eat. And one of the prophets finds a gourd vine. And he said, "Boy, these look good." And so he cut down the gourds and took them over to the pot. And, you can just about see him slicing them up and dropping them in the pot. And when they begin to eat, one of the, or more of the prophets call out and say, "There's death in the pot." And Elisha calls for some, basically flour, and he puts it into it and stirs it and said, "It's okay to eat now." And sure enough, it was. So another miracle. This is a miracle regarding food that is involved there. But it's not the only miracle regarding food. Look at verse 42. Then a man came from Baal Shalishah and brought the man of God bread of the first fruits, 20 loaves of barley bread, and newly ripened grain in his knapsack. And he said, "Give it to the people that they may eat." Now, let me pause long enough to say it appears that this man must have been a believer. Why do I say that? Because he's brought first fruits. Who's he taking the first fruits to? He's taking them to the man of God. In Israel, you're supposed to offer the first fruits to God, usually as a wave offering. In this case, it comes in the form of already baked loaves, but that's what it appears to be. All right, so Elisha has it distributed, but now listen to this. But his servant said, "What? Shall I set this before 100 men?" And he said again, "Give it to the people that they may eat. For thus says the Lord, they shall eat and have some left over." So notice the words, "Thus says the Lord." Next verse. So he set it before them, and they ate and had some left over. Now watch the next statement. According to the word of the Lord. Now, what have we learned all the way through our study of the Old Testament? That covenants with God involve two things: promises and conditions. If you meet the conditions, you receive the promise. Okay, in this case, it's miraculous. I understand that. But the rule holds no matter what. It holds even today. If God's made a promise, it will be yours if you fulfill the conditions. They fulfilled the conditions, everybody ate, and there was food left over, according to the word of the Lord. All right, chapter 5. This is probably the one that you know the most about of all these stories. It is often told in children's Bible classes. It's the story of a man by the name of Naaman. God used Naaman to help the Syrian army. And by the way, when Whitworth talks about it, he talks about Aram or the Arameans, which same bunch of people. Don't get confused. It's the same group. God used Naaman to help Syria to win a number of victories. You might say, wait a minute. What do you mean God used Naaman? Well, he used Pharaoh. And by the way, he used Pharaoh in kind of a negative way. That is, Pharaoh was stubborn, and God used his stubbornness to demonstrate he was God. Did God use Babylon? Did he use the Assyrians? And the answer each time is yes. I'm going to go a step further. We don't talk about this very often. God used the Romans. Yeah, he used the Romans. He had everything set up perfectly for the coming of the Messiah. So does this mean at that moment that Naaman is a believer in God? Probably not. Not very likely. He's going to become one, but he's probably not one right now. Okay, so the text then observes, despite all the great things that he had done, guess what? He's a leper. Now, if I said leprosy today and didn't catch him off guard, so I'm not going to ask him, but I suspect Christian could figure out what leprosy is called today. I think it's Hansen's disease or some such as that. In Bible times, especially in the Old Testament, but even in the New, leprosy was not always Hansen's disease. Leprosy is a more of a blanket type of word that stands for various kinds of fleshly afflictions. It can go all the way. So I read from those that know the history. It can go all the way from psoriasis to the leprosy we know today, which is pretty bad, to be honest about it. So all I know is that under the laws of Israel, he's counted as unclean. In Israel, he would not be allowed to stay in the main body of the camp because he's got leprosy. So as it turns out, Naaman, in the battles that he'd been a part of, had taken captive a woman, a little Jewish girl, who he then had placed in his service, or more nearly, in his wife's service. And when the young girl figured out that her master had leprosy, she said to her mistress, she said, and I'm going to put it in the way we'd say it, I wish he could go to Israel where a prophet of God is. Well, Naaman carries that word, apparently, to the king of Syria. And this probably has been Hadad II, although I cannot guarantee that. It's likely. That's who it is. He goes to him and he tells him what's going on, and the king, the Syrian king, writes out a letter. He sends a big pile of good things, money, clothing, things like that. And he sends him with a letter, and guess who he addresses the letter to? To the king. Now, this probably is Jehoram. We don't know that either. We just know he goes to the king. And what he says to the king is, I've sent you my servant so you can cause him to be recovered from his leprosy. Now, I don't fully know what the thinking of the king of Syria was, but I've got a guess. Seemed to me if a fellow could cure leprosy, we'd probably make him king. That's my guess. Now, is that what I don't know. But you'd think the king would know who the fellow would be. Well, the king receives the letter. He reads the letter. He turns to everybody around him and he said, look at the fight this guy's trying to pick with me. He's setting me up for war. That's what he's doing. And Elisha, by the way, tears his clothes, which is the Jewish form of showing sorrow and mourning, and you're really upset, that kind of thing. Elisha sends a messenger and he says, hey, send him down here to me so he can find out there is a man of God here. So Naaman goes. Now, this where it gets interesting. Already Naaman has learned of this ability to be recovered of leprosy from a young servant girl, unnamed, a simple person, not a ruler, not a king, not a commander of anything, just a servant girl. Naaman goes to the house of Elisha, and lo and behold, Elisha doesn't even come to the door. He sends his servant, we presume Gehazi, and here's the message. Go to the Jordan and dip 7 times. Okay. Naaman hears that, and he gets in a huff. Now, you may not use that word. You choose your word. He's not happy because he has envisioned in his mind how all this is going to take place. See? Behold, I thought, the man of God will surely come out to me. You can almost imagine. He sees this great dramatic ceremony where he lays his hands on him, calls on the name of his God, and he heals him. Naaman didn't get that from Elisha. He didn't even get to see Elisha at this point. So he goes off in a huff to pout. That's kind of what I'd say. Again, nameless servants come to him. We don't know who they are. And here's their question. If the prophet had have asked you to do something great, wouldn't you have done it? How much easier it is then when he just says, wash and be clean. Now, let me give a little bit of an explanation about Naaman's concern. He says, aren't Abana and Pharpar, rivers of Damascus, far better than all the waters of Israel? And the answer to that, in terms of human terms, would be yes. James, I fished one time in the mountains of Arizona, and the water was so clear, you could see the brown German trout in the water. That's the way a bonfire are. Clear, crystal clear, beautiful, beautiful rivers. The Jordan, honestly, in Mississippi, we would call it a muddy ditch. That's about where it's going to rank. It's not a pretty river, even now, not a pretty river at all. But the servant's point is, again, what? Simplicity. Simplicity. When God gives you a message and it's simple, just do it. Just follow through. So Naaman goes down, and what does he do? He dips 7 times in the Jordan River. In the Septuagint, in your notes, those of you who have notes on the screen, yes, it should say LXX. That's the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Scripture. Guess what word they use for dip? Baptizo. The exact word that you find in the New Testament in Acts chapter 2, verse 38, just one example. Same word. And it means to dip, to plunge, to immerse. So what does Naaman do? Well, he, so to speak, baptizes himself 7 times. Now, I think it should be noted that he was not clean after the 6th time. You could say not after 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He wasn't clean any one of those times. When was he clean? When he fulfilled the will of God. The simplicity that the servants pointed to, when that's fulfilled, he's cleansed. And his flesh comes back to him like the flesh of a young man. I think there's some of us in here that would bargain for that if we could find that place where you could do that. But that's what happened. That's exactly how it went. So what did Naaman do? Naaman now was very pleased. He went back to Elisha's house, and this time he actually gets to see Elisha, interestingly enough. And he says, won't you take a gift from me? He's got all these clothes, he's got all this gold and silver, he's got all that available. And Elisha says, no. Now, why does he do that? It appears to me that Elisha's emphasis is exactly what he told the king of Israel. And what did he tell him? Send him here that he'll know that there is a man of God in Israel. If he'd have taken the money, the implication would have been he did something that was warranted the money. He did not do anything that warranted the money. God did. And Elisha wants that known. Now that's my suspicion, okay? And I think that's pretty consistent biblically, but to prove it here, I couldn't do that. I'm just telling you that's what I think. Well, then Naaman says, well, could you give me 2 wagon loads of dirt from Israel? And because I'm going to take that home and I'm going to worship the God of Israel there. It appears that Naaman now is a monotheist, which would not be consistent with being a Syrian, by the way. But he's seeing what this God can do. He's come to realize this is the real God. He then says, I hope you'll forgive me, or God will forgive me when I have to. And it says, hold my hand when my master bow. That's probably a euphemism of sorts, or a synecdoche more nearly. What he's saying is, when I serve as an aide de camp to my king, and he goes into worship, God forgive me, I'm going to have to go in there with him. That's just the way it's going to be. Do you notice that Elisha doesn't make any comment about that? No comment. Is that acceptable to God? I'm going to have to leave that to God. I don't know. I understand his point. but I'm going to let God handle it. He can decide where Naaman gets. God knew Naaman's heart. Now, that's all I can say. How's God deal with it? I don't know. Can't answer that one. So at any rate, Gehazi, though, sees an opportunity. Naaman sets off, and Gehazi thinks, it's a shame that money is there available, and nobody took it. And so he runs after Naaman. And Naaman turns and says, "Is everything okay?" Because he's got an entourage with him. He can fight. He knows how to do that. Everything's fine. But after you left, now watch. First he lies to Naaman. After you left, some prophets came along, and they need some clothes and a little bit of money. And he even specifies how much. And Naaman gives him more clothes than he asked for and more money than he asked for, and he sends some of his men to help carry it back. Well, of course, Gehazi, hustles along with these fellows, gets close to home and says, here, just give it to me. And he goes on and puts it in his room. And then Elisha says, when he sees him, "Where have you been?" "I haven't been anywhere." So now he's lied twice. See? And Elisha, as a man of God, emphasize that, underscore it. Elisha says, "I saw you when you went back." Now what's he done? He's robbed the glory from God. He's lowered the estimation of the man of God in the eyes of Naaman. And what's the result? And he's lied twice, at least. What's the result? You get to have Naaman's leprosy, and somebody in your family always will have it. That's the result. Punishment for what he did. Chapter 6. Opening verses. And the sons of the prophets said to Elisha, "See now, the place where we dwell with you is too small for us." In the original, so those who can read it tell me, I can't. The word that is used here is a word for their meeting place. And specifically, it's the kind of meeting place where inferiors sit and are instructed by a superior. So we would say, putting in our words, we'd say, church building is too small. Now, that's putting in our words. You may not like that, but I try to see things, and understand them. So they begin to build. Elisha goes with them. He's, after all, the one that's instructing them, apparently. And as they begin to work, one of the fellows has borrowed an axe. And while he is working, the axe head flies off and lands in the water. And he goes to Elisha and he says, "Oh me." And let's put it in my words. He says, "What am I going to do? That was a borrowed axe." And Elisha says, basically, "Well, where is it?" And he told him, and Elisha throws a stick into the water, and the stick right over where the axe head is, the axe head floats. Now, it's iron. By the way, in that era, iron was very, very expensive. Wasn't a lot of it in Israel. Maybe elsewhere you could have got it cheap. Not in Israel. Hard to come by. So this is a poor man. This prophet is a poor man, and probably he's worried sick about how am I going to pay for this thing, because I've lost it. And by the way, the law of Moses requires restitution. He's got to pay for it. Kind of reminds me of my grown-up years. Every time I ever borrowed an axe to help my daddy, the axe broke. I bought enough handles to buy at least 2 or 3 axes. I promise you. But never learned my lesson. I still don't own an axe. So if I come to borrow your axe, you ought to take me up on it. Because if your handle's bad, it'll get replaced. It does every time I get one. But anyway, the axe head float, he gives it to him, and another great miracle is worked. We will pick up, Lord willing, next week at verse 8, another great miracle of Elisha that demonstrates he's the man of God.